Hello. Hello, hello. Shabam. Yo. What is up? Am I too quiet at all? Sound all good? I hope it is. Awesome, awesome. Just gonna wait a couple more minutes so we can vibe and chat. Loving this music. Undertale, man. I missed a notification. I did! Yeah, that's Rosie, right? Rosie! Hey, what's up? Thanks for the follow. Love you. Alright. That's fine. I was just wanting to say thank you. But it's kind of rude though. Leaving me here all alone with Alex, of all people. I'm kidding. I love you. Ooh. It's 9 o'clock. No, I love you. It's fine. Ooh, I just hit my entire desk. Trying to break everything. Man, I'm so excited. I'm about to read you a book. This is going to be a VOD. It should be, at least. It's weird hearing you but not being on call. Yeah, I can see what you're talking about. We normally are on call. But I wanted to let everyone come join bedtime stories. So, I keep almost talking. That would be interesting to hear. You're just watching the stream and talking to me. I have no idea what you're saying. You could be cussing me out, for all I know. As you, Alex, probably know, we are reading Percy Jackson, the first book, Lightning Thief. I can't speak. The Lightning Thief. And I'm very excited. Very pretty cover. I think I'm gonna start getting ready to read because I think it's that time. I think it's that time. Are you ready, Alex? Because, like, you're the only one in chat right now. Alright. Reading time. Look, I didn't want to be half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid, reading this because you think it's fiction, great. Read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us, and once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense you too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few moments ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it. But things really started going bad last May, when our 6th grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. But Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes. Mr. Brunner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffer beard and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and jokes and let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep. I hoped the trip would be okay. At least, I hoped that for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happened to me on field trips. Like, at my 5th grade school, when we went to Saratoga battlefield, I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course I got expelled anyways. And before that, at my 4th grade school, when we took a behind the scenes tour of the Marine World Shark Pool, I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk, and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobofit, the freckly, red-headed kleptomaniac girl, hitting my best friend, Grover, in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he was the only 6th grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of all that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny, like every step hurt him. But don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Nancy Bobofit was throwing wads of sandwich that stuck in his curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster had threatened me with death by in-school suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip. I'm going to kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay. I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back to my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know who'll get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I'd decked Nancy Bobofit right then and there. In-school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Brunner led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big, echoey galleries, past marble statues and glass cases full of really old and black and orange pottery. It blew my mind that this stuff had survived for 2,000, 3,000 years. He gathered us around a 13-foot tall stone column with a big sphinx on top of it and started telling us how it was a grave marker, a stele, for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the side. I was trying to listen what he had to say, but it was kind of interesting. Because it was kind of interesting. But everyone around me was talking, and every time I told them to shut up, the other teacher chaperone, Miss Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Mrs. Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket, even though she was 50 years old. She looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She had come to Nancy halfway through the year, when our last math teacher had a nervous breakdown. From her first day, Mrs. Dodds loved Nancy Beaufort and figured I was devil spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me, say, "Now, honey," real sweet, and I knew I was going to get after-school detention for a month. One time, after she'd made me erase answers out of an old math books until midnight, I told Grover I didn't think Miss Dodds was human. He looked at me, real serious, and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Beaufort snickered something about the naked guy on the steel, and I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant it to. The whole group laughed. Mr. Brunner stopped his story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the steel. "Perhaps you'll tell us what this picture represents." I looked at the carving and felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. "That's Kronos, eating his kids, right?" "Yes," Mr. Brunner said, obviously not satisfied. "And he did this because?" Well, I racked my brain to remember. Kronos was the king god, and God, Mr. Brunner said. Titan. I corrected myself. And he didn't trust his kids, who were the gods. So, Kronos ate them, right? But his wife hid baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead. And later, when Kronos grew up, he tricked his dad, Kronos, into barfing up his brothers and sisters. "Ew," said one of the girls behind me. And so, there was this big fight between the gods and titans. I continued. And the gods won. Some snickers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Beaufort mumbled to a friend, like we're going to use this in real life someday. Like it's going to say on our job applications, "Please explain why Kronos ate his kids." "And why, Mr. Jackson," Brunner said, to paraphrase Miss Beaufort's excellent question, "does this matter in real life?" "Busted," Grover muttered. "Shut up," Nancy hissed, her face even brighter than her hair. At least Nancy got packed too. Mr. Brunner was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears. I thought about this question and shrugged. "I don't know, sir." "I see." Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. "Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Kronos a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him disgorge his other 5 children, who, of course, being immortal gods, had been living and growing up completely undigested in the Titan's stomach. The gods defeated their father, sliced him to pieces with his own scythe, and scattered his remains in Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Mrs. Dodds, would you lead us back outside? The class drifted off, the girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow them when Mr. Brunner said, "Mr. Jackson." I knew it was coming. I told Grover to keep going. Then I turned toward Mr. Brunner. "Sir?" Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go. Intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000 years old and had seen everything. Hold on, I need a drink. Talking a lot makes me thirsty. Okay, I apologize. Continuing. Where was I? Here we go. "You must learn the answer to my question," Mr. Brunner told me. "About the Titans? About real life, and how your studies apply to it." "Oh. What you learn from me," he said, "is vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I will accept only the best from you, Percy Jackson." I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure. It was kind of cool on tournament days when he dressed up in a suit of Roman armor and shouted, "What ho!" and challenged us, sword point against chalk, to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who had ever lived, and their mother, and what god they worshipped. But Mr. Brunner expected me to be as good as everyone else, despite the fact that I have dyslexia and attention deficit disorder, and I had never made a grade above a C- in my life. No, he didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me to be better. And I just couldn't learn all those names and facts, much less spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying harder while Mr. Brunner took one long, sad look at the steel, like he had been at this girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum, where we could watch the foot traffic along Fifth Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, with clouds blacker than I'd ever seen over the city. I figured maybe it was global warming or something, because the weather all across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We'd had massive snowstorms, flooding, wildfires from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane blowing in. Nobody else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelting pigeons with Lunchable crackers. Nancy Bobofit was trying to pickpocket something from a lady's purse, and, of course, Mrs. Dodds wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat on the edge of the fountain, away from the others. We thought that maybe if we did that, everybody wouldn't know we were from that school. The school for loser freaks who couldn't make it anywhere else. "Detention?" Grover said. "Nah," I said. Not from Brunner. I just wish he'd laid me off sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then, when I thought he was going to give me some deep philosophical comment to make me feel better, he said, "Can I have your apple?" I didn't have much of an appetite, so I let him take it. I watched the stream of cabs going down Fifth Avenue and thought about my mom's apartment, only a little ways uptown from where we sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump in a taxi and head home. She'd hug me and be glad to see me, but she'd be disappointed too. She'd send me right back to Yancy. Remind me that I had to try harder, even if this was my 6th school in 6 years, and I was probably going to be kicked out again. I wouldn't be able to stand that sad look she'd give me. Mr. Brunner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicap ramp. He ate celery while he read a paperback novel. A red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair, making it look like a motorized cafe table. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Bobofit appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. I guess she'd gotten tired of stealing from the tourists and dumped her half-eaten lunch in Grover's lap. "Oops," she grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange, as if somebody had spray painted her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. The school counselor had told me a million times, count to 10, get control of your temper. But I was so mad, my mind went blank. A wave roared in my ears. I don't remember touching her. But the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain, screaming, "Percy pushed me!" Mrs. Dodd materialized next to us. Some of the kids were whispering, "Did you see the water? Like it grabbed her." I didn't know what they were talking about. All I knew that I was in trouble again. As soon as Mrs. Dodds was sure poor little Nancy was okay, promising to get her a new shirt at the museum gift shop, etc., etc., Mrs. Dodds turned to me. There was a triumphant fire in her eyes, as if I'd done something she'd been waiting for all semester. "Now, honey." "I know," I grumbled. "A month erasing workbooks." That wasn't the right thing to say. "Come with me," Mrs. Dodd said. "Wait," Grover yelped. "It was me. I pushed her." I stared at him, stunned. I couldn't believe he was trying to cover for me. Mrs. Dodd scared Grover to death. She glared at him so hard his whiskery chin trembled. "I don't think so, Mr. Underwood," she said. "But you will stay here." Grover looked at me desperately. "It's okay, man. Thanks for trying." "Honey," Mrs. Dodds barked at me. "Now." Nancy Bobofit smirked. I gave her my deluxe "I'll kill you later" stare. Then I turned to face Mrs. Dodds, but she wasn't there. She was standing at the museum entrance, way at the top of the steps, gesturing impatiently at me to come on. How'd she get there so fast? I have moments like that a lot. When my brain falls asleep or something, and next thing I know, I've missed something, as if a puzzle piece fell out of the universe and left me staring at a blank piece behind it. The school counselor told me this was a part of the ADHD in my brain misinterpreting things. I wasn't so sure. I went after Mrs. Dodds. Halfway up the steps, I glanced back at Grover. He was looking pale, cutting his eyes between me and Mr. Brunner, like he wanted Mr. Brunner to know something was going on. But Mr. Brunner was absorbed in his novel. I looked back up. Mrs. Dodd had disappeared again. She was now inside the building, at the end of the entrance hall. Okay, I thought. She's going to make me buy a new shirt for Nancy at the gift shop. But apparently that wasn't the plan. I followed her deeper into the museum. When I finally caught up to her, we were back at the Greek and Roman section. Except for us, the gallery was empty. Mrs. Dodds stood with her arms crossed in front of a big marble frieze of the Greek gods. She was making this weird noise in her throat, like growling. Even without the noise, I would have been nervous. It's weird being alone with a teacher, especially Mrs. Dodds. Something about the way she looked at Freeze, as if she wanted to pulverize it. You've been giving us problems, honey, she said. I did the safe thing. I said, yes, ma'am. She tugged on the cuffs of her leather jacket. Did you really think you could get away with it? The look in her eyes was beyond mad. It was evil. She's a teacher, I thought nervously. It's not like she's gonna hurt me. I said, I'll try harder, ma'am. Thunder shook the building. We are not fools, Percy Jackson, Mrs. Dodd said. It was only a matter of time before we found you out. Confess, and you will suffer less pain. I didn't know what she was talking about. All I could think of was that the teachers must have found my illegal stash of candy I'd been selling out of my dorm room. Or maybe they'd realized I got my essay out on Tom Sawyer from the internet without ever reading the book. And now they were going to take away my grade. Or worse, they were going to make me read the book. Well, she demanded. Ma'am, I don't... Your time is up, she hissed. Then the weirdest thing happened. Her eyes began to glow like barbecue coals. Her fingers stretched, turning into talons. Her jacket melted into large, leathery wings. She wasn't human. She was shriveled hag with bat wings and claws and a mouth full of yellow fangs, and she was about to slice me to ribbons. Then things got even stranger. Mr. Brunner, who'd been out in the front of the museum a minute before, wheeled his chair into the doorway of the gallery, holding a pen in his hand. What ho, Percy! He shouted, and tossed the pen through the air. Mrs. Dodds lunged at me. With a yelp, I dodged and felt talons slash the air next to my ear. I snatched the ballpoint pen out of the air, but when it hit my hand, it wasn't a pen anymore. It was a sword. Mr. Brunner's bronze sword, which he always used on tournament day. Mrs. Dodd spun toward me with a murderous look in her eyes. My knees were jelly. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the sword. She snarled, "Die, honey." And she flew straight at me. Absolute terror ran through my body. I did the only thing that came naturally. I swung the sword. The metal blade hit her shoulder and passed clean through her body, as if she were made of water. Hiss! Mrs. Dodds was a sandcastle in a power fan. She exploded into yellow powder, vaporized on the spot, leaving nothing but the smell of sulfur and a dying screech and a chill of evil in the air, as if those two glowing red eyes were still watching me. I was alone. There was a ballpoint pen in my hand. Mr. Brunner wasn't there. Nobody was there but me. My hands were still trembling. My lunch must have been contaminated with magic mushrooms or something. Had I imagined the whole thing? I went back outside. It had started to rain. Grover was sitting by the fountain, a museum map tented over his head. Nancy Bobofit was still standing there, soaked from her swim in the fountain, grumbling to her ugly friends. When she saw me, she said, "I hope Miss Kerr whooped your butt." I said, "Who?" "Our teacher. Duh." I blinked. We had no teacher named Miss Kerr. I asked Nancy what she was talking about. She just rolled her eyes and turned away. I asked Grover where Miss Dodds was. He said, "Who?" But he paused at first. And he wouldn't look at me. So I thought he was messing with me. "Not funny, man," I told him. "This is serious." Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Brunner sitting under his red umbrella, reading his book as if he never moved. I went over to him. He looked up, a little distracted. "Ah, that would be my pen. Please bring your own writing utensil in the future, Mr. Jackson." I handed Mr. Brunner his pen. I hadn't even realized I was still holding it. "Sir," I said, "where's Miss Dodds?" He stared at me blankly. "Who?" "The other chaperone? Mrs. Dodds? The pre-algebra teacher?" He frowned and sat forward, looking mildly concerned. "Percy, there is no Miss Dodds on this trip. As far as I know, there has never been a Miss Dodds at Yancey Academy. Are you feeling all right?" Everything... Ooh, why did that stop? Okay. Alright, we're still good. Chapter 2. I was used to the occasional weird experience, but usually they were over quickly. This 24/7 hallucination was more than I can handle. For the rest of the school year, the entire campus seemed to be playing some kind of trick on me. The students acted as if they were completely and totally convinced that Miss Kerr, a perky blonde woman who I'd never seen in my life until she got on our bus at the end of the field trip, had been our pre-algebra teacher since Christmas. Every so often, I would spring a Miss Dodds reference on someone, just to see if it could trip them up, but they would stare at me like I was a psycho. Every so often, I would spring a Mrs. I just read that. It got so... Whoa. That's a... Hold on. There's a typo. It got so, I almost believed them. Mrs. Dodds had never existed. Almost. But Grover couldn't fool me. When I mentioned the name Dodds to him, he would hesitate, then claim she didn't exist. But I knew he was lying. Something was going on. Something had happened at the museum. I didn't have much time to think about it during the days, but at night, visions of Mrs. Dodds with talons and leathery wings would wake me up in a cold sweat. The freak weather continued, which didn't help my mood. One night, a thunderstorm blew out the windows in my dorm room. A few days later, the biggest tornado ever spotted in the Hudson Valley touched down only 50 miles from Yancey Academy. One of the current events we studied in social studies class was the unusual number of small planes that had gone down in sudden squalls in the Atlantic last year. That year. Hold on, water. Alright. Where was I? Here. I started feeling cranky and irritable most of the time. My grades slipped from D's to F's. I got into more fights with Nancy Bobofit and her friends. I was sent out into the hallway in almost every class. Finally, when our English teacher, Mr. Nicole, asked me for the millionth time why I was too lazy to study for spelling tests, I snapped. I called him an old sot. I wasn't even sure what it meant, but it sounded good. The headmaster sent my mom a letter the following week, making it official. I would not be invited back next year to Yancey Academy. Fine, I told myself. Just fine. I was homesick. I wanted to be with my mom in our little apartment on the Upper East Side. Even if I had to go to public school and put up with my obnoxious stepfather and his stupid poker parties. And yet, there were things I'd miss at Yancey. The view of the woods out my dorm window, the Hudson River in the distance, the smell of pine trees. I'd miss Grover, who'd been a good friend, even if he was a little strange. I worried how he'd survive next year without me. I'd miss Latin class too. Mr. Brunner's crazy tournament days, and his faith that I could do well. As exam week got closer, Latin was the only test I studied for. I hadn't forgotten what Mr. Brunner had told me about this subject being life and death for me. I wasn't sure why, but I'd started to believe him. The evening before my final, I got so frustrated, I threw the Cambridge Guide to Greek Mythology across my dorm room. Words had started swimming off the page, circling my head. The letters doing 180s as if they were riding skateboards. There was no way I was going to remember the difference between Chiron and Charon, or Polydikes and Polydeuces, In conjugating those Latin verbs, forget it. I paced the room, feeling like ants were crawling around inside my shirt. I remembered Mr. Brunner's serious expression, his 1,000-year-old eyes. I will only accept the best from you, Percy Jackson. I took a deep breath. I picked up the mythology book. I'd never asked a teacher for help before. Maybe if I talked to Mr. Brunner, he could give me some pointers. At least I could apologize for the big fat F I was about to score on this exam. I didn't want to leave Yancey Academy with him thinking I hadn't tried. I walked downstairs to the faculty offices. Most of them were dark and empty, but Mr. Brunner's door was ajar. Light from his window was stretching across the hallway. I was 3 steps from the door handle when I heard voices inside the office. Mr. Brunner asked a question. A voice that was definitely Grover's said, "Worried about Percy, sir." I froze. I'm not usually an eavesdropper, but I dare you try to not listen if you hear your best friend talking about you to an adult. I inched closer. "Alone this summer," Grover was saying. "I mean, a kindly one. In the school? Now that we know for sure, and they know too, we would only make matters worse by rushing him," Mr. Brunner said. "We need the boy to mature more." "But he may not have time. The summer solstice deadline will have to be resolved without him, Grover. Let him enjoy his ignorance while he still can." "Sir, he saw her." "His imagination," Mr. Brunner insisted. "The mist over the students and staff will be enough to convince him of that." "Sir, I can't fail in my duties again." Grover's voice was choked with emotion. "You know what that would mean?" "You haven't failed, Grover," Mr. Brunner said kindly. "I should have seen her for what she was. Now let's just worry about keeping Percy alive until next fall." The mythology book dropped out of my hand and hit the floor with a thud. Mr. Brunner went silent. My heart hammering, I picked up the book and backed down the hallway. A shadow slid across the lighted glass of Brunner's office door. The shadow of something much taller than my wheelchair-bound teacher, holding something that looked suspiciously like an archer's bow. I opened the nearest door and slipped inside. A few seconds later, I heard a slow clop, 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 like muffled wood blocks. Then a sound like an animal snuffing right outside my door. A large, dark shape paused in front of the glass, then moved on. A bead of sweat trickled down my neck. Somewhere, in the hallway, Mr. Brunner spoke. "Nothing," he murmured. "My nerves haven't been on right since the winter solstice." "Mine either," Grover said. "But I could have sworn." "Go back to the dorm," Mr. Brunner told him. "You've got a long day of exams tomorrow." "Don't remind me." The lights went out in Mr. Brunner's office. I waited in the dark for what seemed like forever. Finally, I slipped out into the hallway and made my way back to the dorm. Grover was lying on his bed, studying his Latin exam notes, like he'd been there all night. "Hey," he said bleary-eyed. "You going to be ready for this test?" I didn't answer. You look awful, he frowned. Is everything okay? Just tired. I turned so he couldn't read my expression and started getting ready for bed. I didn't understand what I'd heard downstairs. I wanted to believe I'd imagined the whole thing. But one thing was clear. Grover and Mr. Brunner were talking about me behind my back. They thought I was in some kind of danger. The next afternoon, as I was leaving the 3-hour Latin exam, my eyes swimming with all the Greek and Roman names I'd misspelled, Mr. Brunner called me back inside. For a moment, I was worried he'd find out about my eavesdropping the night before, but that didn't seem to be the problem. Percy, he said, don't be discouraged about leaving Yancey. It's for the best. His tone was kind, but the words still embarrassed me. Even though he was speaking quietly, the other kids finishing the test could hear. Nancy Bubbleford smirked at me and made a sarcastic little kissing motions with her lips. I mumbled, "Okay, sir." Mr. Brunner wheeled his chair back and forth like he wasn't sure what to say. This isn't the right place for you. It was only a matter of time. My eyes stung. Here was my favorite teacher in front of the class telling me I couldn't handle it. After saying he believed me all year, now he was telling me I was destined to get kicked out. Right, I said, trembling. No, Mr. Brunner said. Oh, confound it all. What I'm trying to say, you're not normal, Percy. There's nothing to be... Thanks, I blurted. Thanks a lot, sir, for reminding me. Percy, but I was already gone. Water. I'm a thirsty boy. On the last day of the term, I shoved my clothes into the suitcase. The other guys were joking around, talking about their vacation plans. One of them was going on a hiking trip to Switzerland. Another was cruising the Caribbean for a month. They were juvenile delinquents, like me, but they were rich juvenile delinquents. Their daddies were executives or ambassadors or celebrities. But I was a nobody from a family of nobodies. They asked me what I'd be doing this summer, and I told them I was going back to the city. What I didn't tell them was that I'd have to get a summer job, walking dogs or selling magazine subscriptions, and spend my free time worrying about where I'd go to school in the fall. Okay. Oh, one of the guys said, "That's cool." They went back to their conversation as if I'd never existed. The only person I dreaded saying goodbye to was Grover, but as it turned out, I didn't have to. He'd booked a ticket to Manhattan on the same Greyhound as I had. So there we were, together again, heading into the city. During the whole bus ride, Grover kept glancing nervously down the aisle, watching the other passengers. It occurred to me that he'd always acted nervous and fidgety when we left Yancey, as if he'd expected something bad to happen. Before, I'd always assumed he was worried about getting teased, but there was nobody to tease him on the Greyhound. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I said, looking for kindly ones. Grover nearly jumped out of his seat. What? What do you mean? I confessed about eavesdropping on him and Mr. Brunner the night before the exam. Grover's eye twitched. How much did you hear? Oh, not much. What's the summer solstice deadline? He winced. Look, Percy, I was just worried for you. See, hallucinating about demon math teachers. Grover. And I was telling Mr. Brunner that maybe you were overstressed or something, because there was no such person as Miss Dodds, and... Grover, you're a really bad liar. His ears turned pink. From his shirt pocket, he fished out a grubby business card. Just take this, okay? In case you need me this summer. The card was in fancy script, which was murder on my dyslexic eyes, but I finally made out something like Grover Underwood, Keeper, Half-Blood Hill, Long Island, New York, 800-009-0009. What's half? Don't say it out loud, he yelped. That's my, summer address. My heart sank. Grover had a summer home. I never considered that his family might be as rich as the others at Nancy. Okay, I said glumly. So, if I want to come and visit your mansion? He nodded. Or if you need me. Would I need you? Came out harsher than I meant it to. Grover blushed right down to his Adam's apple. Look, Percy, the truth is, I kinda have to protect you. I stared at him. All year long, I'd gotten in fights, keeping bullies away from him. I'd lost sleep worrying that he'd get beaten up next year without me. And here he was, acting like he was the one who had to defend me. Grover, I said, what exactly are you protecting me from? There was a huge grinding noise under our feet. Black smoke poured from the dashboard, and the whole bus filled with a smell like rotten eggs. The driver cursed and limped the Greyhound over to the side of the highway. After a few minutes, clanking around the engine compartment, After a few minutes, clanking around the engine compartment, the driver announced that we'd all have to get off. Grover and I filed outside with everybody else. We were on a stretch of country road, no place you'd notice if you didn't break down there. On our side of the highway, there's nothing but maple trees that litter from passing cars. On the other side, across 4 lanes of asphalt shimmering with afternoon heat, was an old-fashioned fruit stand. The stuff on the sale looked really good. Heaping boxes of blooded cherries and apples, walnuts and apricots, jugs of cider in a clawfoot tub full of ice. There was no customers, just 3 old ladies sitting in rocking chairs in the shade of a maple tree, knitting the biggest pairs of socks I'd ever seen. These socks were the size of sweaters, but they were clearly socks. The lady on the right knitted one of them. The lady on the left knitted the other. The lady in the middle held an enormous basket of electric blue yarn. All 3 women looked ancient, with pale faces, wrinkled like fruit leather, silver hair tied back in white bandanas, bony arms sticking out of their bleached cotton dresses. The weirdest thing was, they seemed to be looking right at me. I looked over at Grover to say something, but about this and saw that the blood had drained from his face. His nose was twitching. "Grover," I said. "Hey man, tell me they're not looking at you." "They are, aren't they?" "Yeah, weird, huh? Think those socks would fit me?" "Not funny, Percy. Not funny at all." The old lady in the middle took out a huge pair of scissors, gold and silver, long-bladed like shears. I heard Grover catch his breath. "We're getting on the bus," he told me. "Come on." "What?" I said. "It's 1,000 degrees in there." "Come on." He pried open the door and climbed inside, but I stayed back. Across the road, the old ladies were still watching me. The middle one cut the yarn, and I swear I could hear the snip across 4 lanes of traffic. Her 2 friends balled up the electric blue socks, leaving me wondering who they could possibly be for. Sasquatch or Godzilla? At the rear of the bus, the driver wrenched a big chunk of smoking metal out of the engine compartment. The bus shuddered, and the engine roared back to life. The passengers cheered. "Darn right," yelled the driver. He slapped the bus with his hat. "Everybody back on the road. Everybody back on board." Once we got going, I started feeling feverish, as if I caught the flu. Grover didn't look much better. He was shivering, and his teeth were chattering. "Grover." "Yeah?" "What are you not telling me?" He dabbed his forehead with his shirt sleeve. "Percy, what did you see back at the fruit stand?" "You mean the old ladies?" "What is it about them, man? They're not like Mrs. Dodds, are they?" His expression was hard to read, but I got the feeling that the fruit stand ladies were something much, much worse than Mrs. Dodds. He said, "Just tell me what you saw." The middle one took out her scissors, and she cut the yarn. He closed his eyes and made a gesture with his fingers that might have been crossing himself, but it wasn't. It was something else, something almost older. He said, "You saw her snip the cord." "Yeah, so?" But even as I said it, I knew it was a big deal. "This is not happening," Grover mumbled. He started chewing at his thumb. "I don't want this to be like the last time." "What was the last time?" "Always 6th grade. They never get past 6th. "Grover," I said, because he was really starting to scare me. "What are you talking about?" "Let me walk you home from the bus station. Promise me." This seemed like a strange request to me, but I promised he could. "Is this like a superstition or something?" I asked. No answer. "Grover, that snipping of the yarn, does that mean somebody's going to die?" He looked at me mournfully, like he was already picking the kind of flowers I'd like best on my coffin. And that's where we're going to stop. And we'll pick up Friday night? Yeah, Friday night on chapter 3. Ooh, my throat, my voice is tired. I am tired. And I've got school in the morning. So, good night. Have a good sleep. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye. Oh.